Welcome to the Prospective Doctor podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Each week we cover topics related to the pre-med journey to medical school and beyond, from the MCAT to completing your application and from starting medical school to choosing a specialty. Our podcast will provide essential information for anyone contemplating a career in medicine.
Hi everyone, this is Dr. Ziggy Yoediono from Med School Coach. Thanks for joining me. I hope you all are staying safe during this unprecedented time. So today, I'm really excited to introduce you to Michael, who is a recent med school applicant as well as a med school coach client. And for full disclosure, I was his med school coach advisor during the application process. So because Michael just finished the med school application process with amazing results, I thought this would be the perfect time to get some fresh, firsthand advice about how to optimize various facets of primary and secondary applications. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Dr. Yoediono, for welcoming me. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Well, thanks for taking the time. So the first thing I want to start off with is, for better or worse, Michael, was there anything that really surprised you about the med school application process as you were going through it? And if so, can you briefly share it with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing that definitely surprised me was really just the amazing range of experiences that people come into medicine with. On the interview trail, I was really privileged to have met some really amazing individuals that have had other careers or really incredible life experiences outside of college that have led them to medicine. And I guess I always thought that there was a specific path that you follow to becoming a doctor, but that assumption was just absolutely shattered. On a more logistical note, though, the way secondary applications sort of came flooding in was a little bit startling. They kind of just hit you sometime in the middle of the summer. But if you have a nice framework ready and some time-tested time management skills, I think they're more than doable.
All right. Yes. And it's funny you should bring that up because that's time management and secondaries are something we're definitely going to talk about. So speaking of time management, one of the biggest issues when applying to medical school is time management, given that, many of you are in school or you have a job, and many of you are sometimes even studying for the MCAT at the same time. So that being said, Michael, what advice do you have on optimizing time management when applying, given that you have to juggle so many other responsibilities?
Yeah, I think this is a really, really important question and such a crucial part to the med school process. I think one thing you can't avoid about this application process is that it's really long and it's really drawn out, meaning more often than not, you will be doing something else during that time, whether that's working, you're on a gap year and doing research, or you're still in school. And I think the key to time management in general is really chopping up seemingly large tasks into smaller, more manageable periods of work where you can maximize productivity and prevent yourself from burning out. So if you're studying for the MCAT, for example, this is especially crucial for retaining information and for giving your brain a rest when it needs it. But I think this works well when you are tackling personal statements, activities, descriptions, and even secondaries, because at first the amount of work you have can seem truly overwhelming. Because let's face it, it's a lot. And with the number of schools people apply to nowadays, there are many essays to write. As I said, though, I think it's important to give yourself attainable, shorter-term goals that focus on finishing parts of the work as opposed to the whole thing at once. That way you can have a schedule that helps you feel like you're organized, and most importantly, you will know if you're getting things done on time.
Awesome advice. And I will just add to that, having worked with Michael throughout the year, he really is the time management guru who's very detail-oriented. We never had a meeting where he didn't have an agenda ready with very detailed, meaningful questions and issues that he wanted to bring up. So you guys would be very wise to listen to him. So, as you know, better than most, Michael, the biggest parts of the primary application are the personal statement, the work activity section, letters of recommendation, and the school list. So I just thought that for each one, if you could just give some pointers on how to optimize each part so each applicant can really stand out from the pack. I thought I would just go down the list and hear what pearls of wisdom that you had to say, and then we would go from there. So what advice do you have about personal statements?
Yeah, so I think this is really like the gem of your application.
Yes.
It comes down to it. So I think more than anything, it's really your chance to stand out. It's your chance to really put a face to all the numbers, the grades, and the activities of your application. If you had any unique challenges or obstacles that may have influenced sort of your educational journey or your personal journey, whether it's to medicine or not, I think, any sort of really interesting life experiences, I think this is a great place to craft a narrative around those. Mm-hmm. My advice for the personal statement really is to consider two main questions. The first being, what has led you to medicine? And the second being, why are you specifically a good fit for medicine? So I think it can be easy for many applicants to neglect this second question that I bring up.
Exactly.
What I mean by distinguishing the two questions is that, yes, it is good to include the volunteer or research experiences that may have led you to medicine, but you really need to demonstrate how your life experiences have fostered qualities within you that translate to you being a successful medical student and a successful future physician. So essentially, what qualities do you have that you believe medical schools need to know about you that they cannot get from your GPA, your MCAT scores, or your activity descriptions? So focus on the path to medicine, but also make sure to bring out why you specifically fit in this career.
Yeah, such great advice. And I'm really, the key word that stuck out to me as you were giving this great advice was the word qualities about yourself. A lot of applicants do not do that. They just sort of do a laundry list of experiences and they don't tell anything about themselves. So I'm really, really glad that you mentioned that. What about the work activities section?
Yeah, so the work and activities section is really an exercise in being concise. The AAMC doesn't give you much space, and trust me, those characters go by really fast. Therefore, you really want to hone in on the most important aspects of your work and activities. And the more concrete accomplishments or quantifiable results you can mention, the better. So you want to be extremely granular about the details because these will help separate you from other applicants. For example, if you had volunteered at a clinic in a special program, you want to mention if this program had any specific impact on a specific number of patients over a specific period of time. Mm-hmm. This helps give the sort of admissions committee like a really, detailed idea of exactly what you did and what kind of impact it had. How did your patients benefit from that work? Try to be as specific as possible while also being concise. It really is a difficult task, but one that is super important.
Yeah, no, that, again, great advice. And, so the takeaway point from this is about being, granular and specific as possible, and just sort of to extrapolate from what Michael was saying, part of the reason is because you guys are these amazing applicants who have very similar experiences that you have to write about. And so the only way you're going to differentiate yourself as you write about it in the work activity section is by the level of detail that you provide. Otherwise, the admissions committee is really not going to know, basically. So this is really the time to sort of toot your horn and really let them know what you've been doing. And, just to add to that, as Michael probably can attest to, it is an iterative process in writing the work activity section, because as he mentioned before, space is so limited. It's like New York real estate, where really every word counts, basically. And it takes time to figure out, because the problem initially at the beginning is like, oh my God, I have 500,000 things I want to say. How do I squeeze it in this little amount, basically? And so keep that in mind and don't assume you're going to get it perfect on the first try, basically. So Michael, what about letters of recommendation?
Yeah, so this part of the process was definitely tough for me personally. Before I came close to applying, I was kind of worried about finding people to write letters of recommendation for me. And this mainly comes from the fact that, many colleges kind of have massive science lectures. Mm-hmm. It's hard to kind of develop a personal relationship with science faculty unless if you've done research for them over an extended period of time. The major piece of advice I have for other applicants when it comes to letters of recommendation was to prioritize the depth of your relationship with a letter writer over considering how prestigious their position is. Ultimately, if the letter is more personal and can really speak to your unique strengths and qualities, that'll carry much more weight than a letter written by a well-known professor who will have barely ever talked to you. Also, don't be afraid to talk to people outside of the sciences or medicine to write letters for you. If you have worked a job in another sector or had a fantastic relationship with a language instructor, ask them. They may be able to speak about parts of you that a science faculty member or a lab PI just cannot. And I think it's really good to, kind of bring different perspectives into who you are as a person. It doesn't always have to be, how great you do in a class with midterms or something like that, or how well you perform in the lab. It could be just who you are as a person. And medical schools really, like to see that as well, even before the interview stage. So, branch out if you can, but otherwise, always go for depth of relationship over, prestige of their position.
Right. Yes. And, sort of just to piggyback onto the issue of depth and what you said about how sometimes it's difficult to form strong relationships with science professors given the size of it. In addition to what you said about, being able to do research with them, sometimes some other tips that I've given clients also is to take advantage of office hours, go there with really good questions, not just questions that ask so you look like you're asking a question, but really good questions. Take advantage of review sessions if you're able to do that. And also if you have the opportunity to be a teaching assistant, that's also a good way to demonstrate additional responsibilities. And usually you don't even get asked to do that unless you've done well in the class in the first place, basically.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
some other ideas there.
Yeah, if you become a peer tutor for a given course, or you develop a great relationship with one of the teaching staff, and then kind of move forward with staying involved in the course in future years in some way or another, I think that's another great way to develop a good relationship with a science faculty member who it may be hard to otherwise, just based on the size of the course.
Yes, absolutely. And so the sort of final important part of the primary application, Michael, what are your thoughts on developing your school list?
Yeah. So crafting a school list can really be daunting for many students, since, medical schools don't really offer tours or information sessions the way that undergraduate colleges do. As such, you really don't know much about these schools other than what can be found on their websites, at least, before you apply. So my suggestion for this part of the process is really sitting down to think about what factors will influence your decision come the following spring. Do you care about geography? Are you looking for a research-focused institution or a school focused on primary care? Do you want your school to have an emphasis on community engagement? Is the school located in an area with a diverse patient population? Would you prefer to attend a state school with lower tuition? And finally, does my GPA and MCAT score fall somewhere near a school's median accepted GPA or MCAT? These are just some examples of questions that I had thought about previously, and they're by no means an exact guideline. And there's really no perfect science for crafting a school list, I don't think, because it really depends so much on each person's specific interest. Mm-hmm. The one question I definitely would look at is the GPA and MCAT in terms of how much it aligns with sort of the school's accepted range. But don't be discouraged from applying to a school just because your GPA or MCAT is just, a little bit below their median accepted numbers. One thing I would absolutely not advise you to do is to just apply to the top 25 schools on a given ranking list. Really think about what schools you're applying to and do some research. There may be some schools on a given list that accept very few out-of-state students, for example. You may want to consider that when you apply, because remember that each school you apply to will hopefully bring its own set of secondary essays, and you don't want to waste time on schools that ultimately may leave you a very low chance of being accepted, regardless of how well qualified you are. And I also think that just generally, as with any sort of decision-making process, I think it's really good to keep your mind open. If someone kind of throws a school name your way, take a second to look at it. You never know what you might find. And I was really, blessed to have, for example, came across Kaiser. It was a new school and I hadn't heard about it before. But, as soon as I found out about it, I started to learn more, and I went to an information session and I fell in love with the school. And here I am a full year later, and I'm about to attend the school. So I'm really, really excited. But yeah, just try to keep an open mind and think about the factors that are important to you in your sort of ideal medical school.
Perfect. And Michael, I was wondering, do you have any thoughts on, a question that I get asked a lot is on how many medical schools should I apply to, basically?
Yeah. So I think, there won't be like an exact number for any, given student, but I feel like most schools will apply. Most students will apply to, somewhere between 20 and 40 schools, I think. And it could range anywhere between there. I applied to, somewhere in the high 20s for me personally. And, at some point, you don't want to just add medical schools just for the sake of adding them because, you're less likely to actually be engaged in their application process and less likely to give, major thought to their secondary essays. And at that point, you're not really accomplishing much. But you want to apply to a good balance of schools between, sort of ones where you might have, higher chances of admission at just, based on a preliminary analysis of your stats, although that is by no means the whole picture. I don't think there's a perfect number, but, it really is, like I said earlier, don't just apply to schools because they're on a given list. Really look into them. And if they have lower rates of acceptance, that's completely okay. That should not discourage you from applying. But really, think through it with each school.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. All right. So now I want to move on from primaries and talk a little bit about secondaries. So I know we talked about time management at the start, and so when it comes to secondaries, as you mentioned, where you often get like 20, 30, 40 around the same time, this can be overwhelming, even, for the most organized individuals such as yourself. So how did you deal with this, and what's your advice on approaching so many secondaries in a way that enables, the applicant to craft, top quality answers while still submitting it, within 2 to 3 weeks, right? A timely manner, basically.
Right. So I think the overarching rule with secondary should always be quality over sort of speed. Although you do want to, get them in, as the question states, between, 2 and 3 weeks after you receive them. But at the end of the day, you never want to really sacrifice quality. So a good way to do that is to actually start before the secondaries arrive. If you submit your primary soon after it opens for submission, sometime in June, I believe, you'll have about a month before your first secondaries will arrive. In the meantime, a quick online search can actually allow you to see secondary prompts from pretty much any school from the previous years. In fact, I think that prospective doctor already has a full database of prompts going back a couple of years. So while some schools may change their prompts in a year that you're applying, there are a couple of well-known prompts that are asked by many schools year after year after year. So many will ask a question along the lines of, how will you contribute to the diversity of our school? Other schools will ask you to write about a time that you faced a significant challenge or a setback and to discuss what you learned from it or how you grew from it. If you took a gap year, several schools will ask you to summarize what you've been up to. And many schools will simply ask you, why do you want to come to our school? And if you start working on these sort of common questions ahead of time, you will be able to work through multiple drafts without worrying about timing. And furthermore, you'll relieve some stress for when the very unique prompts come along later that will need specific time to work on them by themselves.
Awesome. Great advice. Thank you. So while we're on the topic of secondary questions and prompts, what, if any, of those did you find the most challenging to write about? And, what made it challenging, and how did you overcome dealing with that?
Yeah, so I think this is a very common prompt for people to find challenging, and that is the question of, why do you want to come to our school? Insert whatever school you want into that sentence. So like I said earlier, pretty much all of the information you have up to this point in the process is from sort of websites. You may have been able to have a conversation with a current student or perhaps a faculty member, but it can oftentimes be really hard not to sound like every other applicant that also likes that same exact program in that same institute and wants to work with that same faculty member at a given medical school. I think the key to this question is limiting how much you actually list about the school itself. Remember, the secondary essays are a chance for the schools to get to know you better as much as it may be for them to get to know you. I misphrased that. It's for schools to get to know you better as much as it's for you to get to know them. So with this prompt, you really want to exhibit how your previous record or your career interests demonstrate how you can actually be successful at a given school that offers that opportunity that you're excited about. So essentially, you have to envision yourself at the school and convince the admissions committee that you will take full advantage of the resources that their school will offer you.
Exactly. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, the importance of personalizing it to why you want to go to the medical school, given that the average applicant, based on my experience, usually just does a laundry list of what makes the medical school so great. And I'm sure, as I've even told Michael before during one of our conversations, medical schools don't need to know why they're great because they're on the medical school admissions committee. They know more about the medical school than you do, basically, and they want to know what makes you great and how specifically you're going to take advantage of, ideally the unique strengths they offer to help advance or achieve your goals. So unless you sort of do it in this way that Michael, laid out in such a detailed, great manner, you're really not going to differentiate your secondary essay from all the others, because most people answer it in the other way that we mentioned, basically. So I'm glad you brought that up, Michael. I'm glad you brought that up.
So, I just think also in the process of answering these types of questions, it'll also give you a better idea of kind of perhaps your fit with that particular school. You'll really you'll obviously do research about the school. But again, the focus of the question should also be on your fit and how you can take advantage of those resources. So you'll really be pushed to kind of reflect on your own interests, on your own, previous experiences, and how, they might change or how they might fit within the medical school landscape. And furthermore, how they'll sort of fit at a given school.
Yes, perfect. Couldn't have said it better. So I want to end by, with the final question. Are there any other pearls of wisdom that you would like to share with current or future applicants?
Yeah, so as much as this is not sort of something typically associated with the med school application process, try to have fun. And I know that probably upon hearing that, you might be, thinking, well, there's no way that's possible. But realistically, you are embarking on the beginning of the next stage in your journey toward becoming a physician. And on the interview trail, you're going to meet many fantastic people that will surprisingly stay in touch with you, even if you don't end up at the same school. Furthermore, you'll find that through writing your personal statement and your secondary essays, you're going to learn so much about yourself and this career you're about to enter. So like I said earlier, split the work up so that it doesn't feel overwhelming, and always, always, always remember to leave time for yourself to decompress and to channel your energy into something not med school related.
All right. Wow. Thank you so much, Michael, for taking the time to share your expertise, and best of luck to you as you embark on your career as a physician. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yes. And so, this ends our podcast for today. For those of you wanting expertise advice for any and all parts of your medical school application, please consider us at Med School Coach. Our advisors are physicians who have been involved with the medical school admissions committees, which means you get an insider's insight on what to expect and how to prepare. And we're at www.medschoolcoach.com. Thank you guys all for taking the time to listen. Please stay safe. And until next time, thank you so much. So, Michael, now this is a question I'm kind of been dying to ask. What was the biggest challenge for you while applying, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge for me was actually just having patience throughout this whole process. There are really long periods of waiting, whether it be for interview invitations or admissions decisions. And there were definitely times where I was just anxiously sitting for weeks waiting to hear from schools. And that can become really difficult. As much as I could, though, I tried to remember that waiting was not necessarily a bad thing, and that the rate with which schools responded to me was really not in my hands. I tried to shift my focus to things that I could actually control. So for example, could I update schools with new accomplishments or work positions obtained after I submitted my application? That was just something that I could think of that I could, consciously work on if that was the situation for me. And I was also fortunate to have a great support network around me that believed in me, as well as peers that were going through the process at the same time. The waiting game is really definitely difficult to deal with, but remember to rest a little bit after you're done with secondaries and give yourself a pat on the back.
All right. Great advice. Thank you so much.
Our mission is to inspire, encourage, and inform students as you journey through a rigorous and intricate process of achieving your dreams in medicine. Visit us at prospectivedoctor.com and medschoolcoach.com for more essential resources in your medical school journey and beyond.